done all of the other eras besides one, and that one being the modern era. Ladies and gentlemen, what a video this is gonna be. I'm super stoked. Wrestle with Andy yet again dropping another banger for us. If you guys are excited like I am, make sure you smash that like button, comment, and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Let me know what you guys think of the modern era. Over the last decade, we have had so many ups and downs in the modern era, and honestly, too much to talk about. So we're going to let Wrestle with Andy do it for us. Let's jump right into this video.
The last decade has been an incredibly interesting and often turbulent one for WWE. Yes, we've seen a lot of highs and lows during this time and came out on the other end with a lot of great memories. But how did we get to this point? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be looking at right now.
Yep.
It all goes back to the mid-2010s, as by the time 2014 came around, it was clear that change was needed within the halls of WWE. And the reason for this was because, while the company was rolling in more money than ever and was still a massive success as a result of this, creatively, it had long since grown stagnant. Hell, this was apparent in the fact that, for the most part, the same names had been on top, wrestling each other in the same combinations for years, all via variations of the same basic storylines. And even when a new star did break through like a CM Punk or a Daniel Bryan, they'd always end up playing second fiddle to the likes of John Cena or
and like I said in the last video, that's one of the things that was the problem. People like Daniel Bryan had to work their tail off when you knew he was top talent already, but he truly, it got to the point where they had no choice. Just like let me give you an example. When R-Truth got fired, and literally every single fan, including myself, had a rampage online. It got to the point where they were almost felt forced to put him back on the roster, right? It's the same thing with Daniel Bryan. He didn't get the attention he deserved from creative, and us fans helped him out. Honestly, we truly had a rampage about it, and he got what he deserved, you know?
Brock Lesnar before long, as the status quo inevitably returned. Really, the only people who had truly broken through and remained in a top spot by the time 2014 came around were The Shield. Yes, as the modern era got going post-WrestleMania 30, it was the trio made up of Roman Reigns, Dean Ambrose, and Seth Rollins who were establishing themselves as the new future of the company, and this was only furthered once all three went off in solo directions after the Architect turned on his brothers in June of 2014 to join the Villainous Authority. Obviously then, this helped to re-establish the Authority as the top heel act in all of WWE after Daniel Bryan had briefly gotten the better of them before he was forced onto the injury shelf indefinitely. But it wasn't just The Shield who were being pushed as new major acts as 2014 got going. No, Bray Wyatt would also raise higher up the card here, as post-loss to John Cena at WrestleMania 30, he sought to recover by setting his sights on Chris Jericho. What was happening with the rest of the roster outside these four? Well, the WWE title scene would get a mix-up itself, as once Daniel Bryan was forced to vacate the gold, John Cena would score his 15th world title win. But he wouldn't be holding on to the gold for long here. No, fresh off of ending The Undertaker's undefeated streak at the Showcase of the Immortals earlier on that
don't
year,
tell me
and
about
shocking
this.
the world in the process, Brock Lesnar would
SummerSlam,
absolutely
right?
annihilate Big Match John in one of the most one-sided squashes ever at SummerSlam, so
Yeah,
he could take
like,
the gold home for
it happened at WrestlePalooza this year. Why does Brock come back and just keep on smashing John? Like, is this just how they want John to go out, like, against Brock Lesnar? I'm lost, because he's moved on to AJ Styles, and he had that match. That was a great match, by the way. If you guys didn't watch that, you should be watching that right now, because it was... I loved it. I don't understand. I'll never understand why Brock Lesnar could just walk out there and destroy somebody who worked their way up there to be champion, or someone who was already a star and was holding that gold with pride and doing a good job at it. I gotta be honest. When John Cena turned back to face, I was happy. I was excited. I know people are like, oh, it got stagnant easy. No, I think it was going to go in the right direction, you know, but they didn't give it much of an opportunity. And obviously at WrestlePalooza, Brock Lesnar smashed him, and now I'm just uninterested, you know, no matter what happens. Even though all AJ Styles and John Cena had a great match, I'm just so I'm
himself.
uninterested, bro.
So began a
I
story
think
that
it's
would
dumb.
carry on all the way up until WrestleMania 31. Who could slay the Beast and bring the title home? And while there were plenty of potential babyface options for this, it didn't take long for it to become apparent that WWE planned for it to be Roman Reigns who would serve as the company's savior here, and from there go on to become the successor to John Cena as the next top babyface in WWE. The only problem with this plan, though, was that back in 2014, the big dog was still green as grass, barely beyond rookie level as far as being a main eventer was concerned, with him hardly having any singles bouts on the main roster yet. And fans could see right through these limitations, as well as WWE's attempts to shove him down their throats whether they wanted him or not. What did this lead to? Well, a strong sense of resentment building amongst the audience was the major consequence, with this being not too dissimilar to how they'd felt when Daniel Bryan was being buried prior to WrestleMania 30. That's right, there was just no way the fans were going to take to Roman as a top guy here, not yet at least. So when he won the 2015 Royal Rumble and booked his ticket into the main event of WrestleMania 31 ahead of people like Dean Ambrose and the recently injury-free Daniel Bryan, it led to the future Tribal Chief getting aggressively booed out of the building. Obviously then, this created a major problem as WWE didn't want their biggest show of the year having its main event hijacked with boos for the supposed top face, especially not when it was hoped that the addition of Sting in his lone WrestleMania match would draw in a lot of lapsed fans once more. And thankfully, Vince McMahon would realize that too, because prior to the event, he finally decided he couldn't put Roman over at WrestleMania anymore, not with these kinds of reactions. So instead, he went for option B, with this option being for Seth Rollins to cash in the Money in the Bank contract he'd won earlier on in 2014 during the main event that night between the Big Dog and Brock Lesnar.
That was a big cash in.
Steal the title away for himself. And so, like that then, the modern era was fully solidified as Seth became the first NXT graduate to hold the top prize on the main roster. But he wouldn't be the last, because by 2015, NXT was already making a name for itself as the hottest brand in all of North American wrestling, with its takeover shows regularly outshining main roster offerings. What made it so great? Well, it being booked by Triple H instead of Vince McMahon, it offered something fresh and different for WWE fans, something which was a lot closer in style to an old territory, with simple booking designed to build up big cards filled with excellent matches. Obviously then, in order to maintain this level of greatness, a lot of new high-level wrestlers were constantly having to be brought in to replace the old ones who were being called up to the main roster. And some of the biggest and best of these, at least as far as the men's division was concerned, were people like Kevin Owens, Finn Balor, Samoa Joe, Shinsuke Nakamura, and the man who served as the heart and soul of the brand
stacked
for so long, Sami Zayn. And they weren't
NXT
the only
was
ones
truly
making
stacked.
NXT the hottest thing in North American wrestling back in the mid-2010s. No, it would also be here that WWE's women's revolution fully got going, as it was then that the Four Horsewomen first rose to prominence.
just like I said before, NXT was just freaking ridiculous. I mean, an amount of talent that was in NXT, and now most women and men wrestlers that are from NXT back in 2015, roughly, they're all stars in their own way. Like, for real, like, they're all great wrestlers.
Charlotte Flair, and Bayley. Yes, within this group, you had a nucleus of something special.
All these girls
which would
became
take
successful.
The developmental brand to heights that, in the opinion of many fans back then, were far higher than that of the main roster. And as if that wasn't enough, additional high-level female workers would be brought in to further raise the game later on down the line too, in the form of excellent Joshi talent like Asuka, Io Shirai, and Kairi Sane. That's right, NXT was truly booming back then, with it serving as the cool WWE brand to watch. And the comparisons which inevitably got made between it and the main roster were not favorable to Raw and SmackDown for the most part. No, while the WWE title reign of Seth Rollins had been well received, and while the addition of some new stars to the mix had helped to freshen things up a little, the overall direction of both Raw and SmackDown was still getting a lot of criticism. Sure, there were some causes for hope, mostly from the likes of recent NXT graduates. But the actual storylines they were being given to work with here often felt nonsensical and scrambled together at the last
Facts.
minute. In fact, it wasn't uncommon to hear stories around this time of Raw's script still being written as the show was going to air, or for entire angles to be dropped on a whim if Vince McMahon took a sudden dislike to them. Really, there were points where it felt like the only person who was being given any real focus at all in WWE was Roman Reigns. And this would only increase the fan rejection of him, particularly when, at the Survivor Series later that year, he finally won the world title for the first time following the Architect vacating the belt as a result of injury. Where would things go from here? Well, it would only get worse for the big dog, unfortunately, because despite there being a brief couple of months towards the end of 2015 where it felt like things had finally turned a corner with him, come the 2016 Royal Rumble, Roman would be getting booed all over again. And all of this would lead to a situation where WrestleMania 32 in the spring of that year ended up serving as a stark portrait of where the company was by the mid-2010s in terms of fan perception. Why was this? Well, despite it legitimately having the biggest attendance in wrestling history, if we don't count those Collision in Korea shows from WCW back in the day, it was not critically well received. With much of the ire being saved for Shane McMahon getting used for an Undertaker match, Bray Wyatt being jobbed out for a Rock segment, and the main event turning fans off as it once again saw the company try to force a square peg into a round hole by having Roman Reigns regain the WWE title from Triple H. Yes, WWE continued to draw boatloads of money here, that much was undeniable. But fans continued to be dissatisfied with what they were seeing on the main roster. And this meant there were more than a few worried faces within the halls of WWE as they understood that something was going to have to give eventually.
Yeah, and
what was the solution to this problem? Well, it seemed clear to everyone watching, pump the brakes on the big dog for a while, and instead go with either Dean Ambrose or Daniel Bryan as the ace, now that John Cena was entering part.
And I feel like this was right around when Roman was getting ready to take a break, because once COVID hit and WWE went to, it kind of had a halt where, like, they weren't doing too much. Roman Reigns returns as the tribal chief, and he's a freaking dog. He just turned into this, like, that guy, like, I can't even really explain it. Like, now he's an all-time talent just based off of, like, what he did for the COVID era. Like, what he did for COVID, like, he was the guy to watch. Him, The Fiend was cool. It was a cool little gimmick that Bray came up with himself. And Drew McIntyre too, bro.
Time status. Sadly, though, this was not what WWE wanted to do.
COVID era was cool. I actually really liked the matches.
It's not like they had much choice in the matter, as it would be around this time that he'd have to enter temporary retirement after a series of head injuries left him in pretty bad shape. Still, there was no reason they couldn't have gone with the lunatic fringe on top, and thankfully this would eventually happen, even if it was mostly a result of a new top babyface having to be crowned quickly after the big dog got suspended over a wellness policy violation in the summer of 2016. But however it came about, the end result was the same. And now that Ambrose was the man, all while John Cena was moving down to the mid-card in order to have his excellent United States title run, it felt like some positive changes were finally being made. This didn't last for long though, because never fully understanding the appeal of Jon Moxley as a crazy man anti-hero, Vince McMahon ended up booking him
James Ellsworth.
And that all led to the whole thing being a bit of a flop. And this wasn't the only major issue WWE had in mid-2016 as, on a larger business scale, there was also a sense that, despite them having two major main roster shows every week, the nature of SmackDown basically having been relegated to being a recap show for Raw meant there was no reason to watch more than one. How would this latter problem be solved? Well, that would be by bringing back the brand split, a move which would once again separate Raw and SmackDown into two separate rosters with two separate sets of belts for each to fight over. And luckily, this brand split would prove to be a success in terms of bringing ratings back up a little bit, especially when it came to Friday nights. That's right, just like with the first roster split back during the early 2000s, it was SmackDown which really came out the winner here, as it was the one which felt the most rejuvenated by the entire situation. Honestly, prior to the creative turnaround which began in 2022, this spell for the blue brand was, as far as many fans were concerned, by far and away the best the main roster had been in years. With Shane McMahon and Daniel Bryan steering the ship in kayfabe, it turned into the land of opportunity, a place where the likes of Becky Lynch, Alexa Bliss, and AJ Styles
I love
rise to the level
SmackDown.
of superstardom.
Dude, the SmackDown in this, like, what is this, 2017, something like that. 2018, 2017, 18, or 19, I don't know. But around this time, this SmackDown was better than Raw.
Of course, that's not to say there was nothing worthwhile happening on Raw here, though. It's just that even if they did have their own success stories and people like Kevin Owens, Sasha Banks, and Finn Balor, they were still being dragged down overall by the fact that Roman Reigns continued to be pushed as the guy, in spite of fans loudly telling the company they didn't want him in this spot. What was going on with NXT while all that was happening? Well, as usual, they continued to deliver. Hell, it was during this period that the brand arguably reached its high watermark with not just the resurgence of tag team wrestling in WWE, a resurgence led by duos like American Alpha and The Revival, but also the addition of NXT UK, a satellite branch of the developmental brand which first introduced WWE audiences to performers such as Gunther, Tony Storm, and Rhea Ripley. And then, of course, there was what many people to this day still consider to be the high watermark of the black and gold brand, the feud between Johnny Gargano and Tommaso Ciampa, which began in 2017.
That might be one of the greatest feuds in NXT history. My friend told me about this feud, and I was like, it's NXT. Like, NXT was cool, but like, yeah. I've never really like gotten to the tag team part of NXT, and this story goes deep.
And went on for well over a year before finally reaching its climax towards the end of the decade. All of this is to say then, even if you weren't happy with the main roster product, there was always something worth watching on the developmental brand. With this becoming such a popular opinion by that point, NXT were actually starting to fill large arenas for their takeover shows. It's just a shame the same couldn't be said for the main roster, as despite SmackDown still having a lot of ups, and even with Raw having highlights like the Chris Jericho and Kevin Owens bromance, attendance at shows was dropping to sometimes scary levels as fans just couldn't find the motivation to attend in person. And while this clearly wasn't all his fault, a lot of the blame for that was put on the shoulders of Roman Reigns, as he was supposed to be the man leading the charge for this new generation. What he really needed then was freshening up, maybe being taken off of TV for a while so that fans could miss him. What no one expected though was that when this did actually happen, it would be done for the reason it was. Yes, it was in the autumn of 2018 that the big dog was pulled from TV indefinitely when he found out that he had a recurrence of the same cancer which had dogged him back when he was in his 20s. Obviously then, this meant Vince McMahon was going to be left with no choice but to find someone else to push in Reigns' place while he was gone and battling for his life. And while many wondered if it might end up being one of his former stablemates in Dean Ambrose or Seth Rollins who got that push, or maybe even someone else like Bray Wyatt, someone who was by then on the verge of reinventing himself as the Nightmarish Fiend, it wouldn't be any of those performers who got the nod for the spot of interim ace. Rather, it would be a woman named Becky Lynch.
Oh yeah, the man.
Right. After transforming into the man in mid-2018, Lynch would undergo a meteoric rise in popularity akin to that of Steve Austin in 1997, with this eventually leading to her becoming the first female to ever serve as the top star of a major wrestling promotion. And that would all end with her main eventing WrestleMania 35 against both Charlotte Flair and former UFC bantamweight champion Ronda Rousey, with both the Raw and SmackDown women's titles on the line. Truly then, this was a historic moment. But it wasn't the only historic moment which took place on that show, as earlier on the same night, Kofi Kingston would become the first African-born star to win the WWE title after he reached the climax of his own meteoric rise, one which had by that point come to be known as Kofi Mania. Did the success of those two angles signify that the WWE main roster had finally turned things around? Well, not exactly, as while Becky Lynch would remain a top star going forward, Kofi would
Kofi got destroyed by Brock
as Roman Reigns
on Friday Night
SmackDown in order to
SmackDown.
reassert his spot at the peak of the card. And sure, fans weren't exactly booing the big dog anymore after what he'd just gone through, but they weren't exactly cheering him either, making the whole thing feel pretty weak in terms of energy and excitement whenever he was on screen. Then, of course, there was the botching of The Fiend, combined with the pushing of acts like Baron Corbin and Lacey Evans, which only served to turn fans off all the more. And that's why this was the worst possible timing as far as Vince McMahon was concerned for a new competitor to rise up, a competitor which went by the name of All Elite Wrestling. Yes, by the autumn of 2019, AEW had begun airing their weekly flagship show, Dynamite, and this left WWE looking to counter them. What would Vince McMahon do to try and stop his new competition in their tracks before they...
I think the reason why WWE even tried harder was because of AEW. If nobody was if competition wasn't a thing for WWE, they probably would suck. And people would still watch because it's would be the big show, But yeah, no, AEW has actually made WWE better.
Fully get established? Well, he'd have NXT go head-to-head with them every week in what would become known as the Wednesday Night Wars. Unfortunately, though, NXT didn't beat AEW during those early years, as the latter had names like Kenny Omega, Chris Jericho, and Jon Moxley, with the latter two having jumped from WWE in order to be a part of this new promotion. And that wasn't the only problem WWE was going through here, as it was in early 2020 that the world went into lockdown, and all of a sudden, no fans were allowed in attendance at shows for the foreseeable future. with this meaning that during those early weeks after things closed down, Raw, SmackDown, and NXT all took place in front of an empty performance center. Hell, even WrestleMania 36 would be forced to take place in the same desolate warehouse, making the whole thing feel about as far away from being the biggest show of the year as it could be. Sure, eventually Vince McMahon would bring in the Thunderdome to try and add some sense of atmosphere to the shows, but throughout 2020, it felt like WWE was fast losing any sense of momentum they had initially gained when SmackDown had moved to Fox. That said, it wasn't like it was all bad news for WWE here, because it had been in 2020 that, after taking a sabbatical from the ring in order to look after his health, Roman Reigns had returned. And this time, he had not returned as the same old tired babyface he'd been before. No, now the big dog had transformed into the tribal chief, a mob boss-like megalomaniacal heel who ruled his family with an iron fist.
He truly changed
the birth of the bloodline,
the modern era,
which, come 2021, was the hottest thing in all of WWE, and was the thing threatening to cause Vince McMahon's promotion to shift the pendulum of momentum back in their direction again. Of course, while it would do this eventually, Vince McMahon wouldn't be there to enjoy it. Why was that? Well, it was in the summer of 2022 that the foundations of WWE were rocked to the core when the boss would leave the company for the first time in light of the scandal and subsequent lawsuit he was involved in. So now, with McMahon gone as head of creative, it was left to Triple H to take over the reins. And this proved to be exactly the fresh eyes the main roster had needed for all these years, as with the game now in charge, not only did the bloodline go to another level with the new addition of Sami Zayn, but a whole new generation of stars could reach the top of the card and become major players. We're talking about acts like Rhea Ripley, Dominic Mysterio, and Gunther here. And then, of course, there was Cody Rhodes, someone who had made the jump back over to WWE from AEW at WrestleMania 39. All of these elements combined helped to rocket the promotion towards new levels of success.
Made it so much better.
In the early 2000s. Yes, this was nothing less than a modern renaissance for the WWE product. And that renaissance would be solidified when, in the midst of weekly sellout crowds attending shows and rising TV ratings, Ari Emanuel and his Endeavor Group purchased the company and added it to their TKO brand alongside UFC.
And this is awful. This is where they got money hungry. When they did a deal with TKO, they're so bad in depth that they will do anything for money. Oh, man.
All well, at around the same point in time, Vince McMahon would leave once and for all. What was happening with NXT while all that was going on? Well, with the brand by then having moved away from the black and gold era into the 2.0 one, there would be some early growing pains. But after a while, the now Shawn Michaels-led show would settle into a groove of its own as it helped to build up new stars like Braun Breaker, Tiffany Stratton, and Roxanne Perez. Of course, the real success story, however, remained the main roster, especially in the lead up to WrestleMania 40. Why was that? Well, this show in many ways would represent the high watermark of WWE's modern hot streak, as it would be here that with The Rock coming back into the fold to act as both a real-life member of the TKO board and the villainous on-screen final boss character, he would stand in the corner of his cousin Roman Reigns as they attempted to stop Cody Rhodes from finishing the story and becoming WWE champion. Would the full might of the bloodline be able to stop Cody Rhodes from winning the gold here? No, it wouldn't be. As after failing to get the job done the year prior, WrestleMania 40 was the moment that the American Nightmare finally did it. And in doing so, it felt like he'd helped...
Bro, when Cody didn't win at WrestleMania 39, the internet blew up. Nobody in their right mind thought Roman was going to win that match. He wins, and the crowd is, like, devastated. I was laughing a little bit. I mean, I won't lie. It was kind of funny.
Top of the world again. Hell, for the rest of the year which followed, they continue to be on fire.
But he won at WrestleMania 40, which is dope.
Usually selling out very quickly, and the product continuing to branch out its pay-per-view schedule around the world to places as far and wide as Australia, France, Puerto Rico, and the UK.
No, that is cool that they're doing that.
And the bloodline angle that we're making WWE so hot here, though. No, aside from some of the other recently elevated names like Rhea Ripley and Gunther that we mentioned a moment ago, there was also the continued excellent work of people like Seth Rollins, Sami Zayn, and Becky Lynch, as well as the full elevation of acts such as Jey Uso, Damian Priest, and Io Sky to thank for this. And as if that wasn't enough, there was also the reintroduction of CM Punk to the roster.
Yeah.
A move which many would have seen as being unthinkable only a year or so prior. Really, for the first time in a long time, it felt like everything was firing on all cylinders as, with the new management in charge, locker room morale was high, and everyone seemed to be working on the same page. And on top of this, WWE would continue to push into further business opportunities, with all this reaching another apex in January of 2025 with the debut of Raw. Obviously then this was a major deal, as with Netflix being the biggest streaming service in the world, it suddenly made WWE available to a lot more people around the planet. And while this would not lead to a full boom period as had happened in the 80s and late 90s, it would still increase the footprint of the company Vince McMahon Sr. had started all those years ago by tenfold. Then, of course, even further inroads would be made in increasing that footprint later on in 2025, at least in terms of the North American market, with the debut of WWE on ESPN. Where has all this left WWE as things stand today? It remains as strong as ever, if not stronger. And it's not going away anytime soon, as WWE are preparing for the future. That's right, with Triple H continuing to be at the helm and now very much positioning himself as the Dana White of WWE, we're beginning to see the rise of a whole new generation of stars like Braun Breaker, Jacob Fatu, Stephanie Vaquer, and Lyra Valkyria, just to name a few. Hell, even NXT, a brand which felt like it was struggling at one point after it initially transformed into its 2.0 incarnation, has been able to successfully build itself back up to the point that it's now involved in invasion angles of its own with the likes of TNA, all while it's building up the generation after the next, the generation which involves the likes of Ricky Saints, Javon Evans, Oba Femi, and Sol Ruka. Will this all lead to an entirely new era being born soon?
Sol Ruka's finisher is nasty. The Soul Snatcher is nasty, bro. The nastiest finisher I might have ever seen. Just nasty. I love it. I gotta be honest, y'all. Andy, like, that might be the first thing I gotta disagree on, bro. Money-wise, they're making a lot of money. Especially since John Cena's on retirement tour. Everybody, as long as he's at that show, they are going to make bank. And they're going to make bank on Saturday night's main event. They're taking all of John Cena. They're everywhere. All you see is John Cena, right? Last run, you know, and it ends at Saturday night's main event. I don't think WWE is going in the right direction. But like someone like Braun Breaker, he could be the face of WWE in these next couple of years. I mean, look what he just did to Seth Rollins.
We'll just have to wait and see. But if something new does take the place of this modern era soon, it'll be building itself on the shoulders of a truly transformative time for WWE. Because over the years, we've seen it go from the depths of creative stagnation all the way to incredible heights with the likes of Cody Rhodes and the Bloodline leading the way. That's right, there's no telling what WWE will look like in 5 years. And that means we're all going to have to watch intently to see how things shake out. Of course, all the while we do, we'll be making sure to remember the events of the modern era which made it all possible by in many ways serving as the most important era in the company's entire history.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of the video. Like I said in the beginning, make sure you show Wrestle with Andy some love. He always makes banger content. As you can see, he's got so many videos. Go check them out. Make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe. Comment down below, who is your favorite wrestler currently in the modern era? And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.